In today's video, looking at the downtown Toronto condo market as it was in the year 2021 in its entirety, going through specific neighborhoods and looking at condo prices in those specific neighborhoods for the entirety of 2021. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, back with another video for you guys here. Today you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office information. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions you may have with regards to anything discussed in this video, anything discussed in previous videos, or any general inquiries with regards to the Toronto/GTA real estate market whatsoever. Lastly, if you wish to do so, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which for this video, I had to go through thousands of transactions, and I'm not being hyperbolic whatsoever. I had to go through thousands of transactions, which is average sold prices per community in downtown Toronto, looking at specific neighborhoods: Bay Street Corridor, C1 Waterfront, C8 Waterfront, Little Portugal, Regent Park, and so much more. As always, before we get into the specific neighborhoods and I break down the prices and some trends that we saw this year in these neighborhoods, there are a couple of key points that I must preface. First and foremost, this accounts for all sold data of condominium apartments. So whether it's lofts or typical condominium apartment units, but doesn't account for condominium townhomes, right? So we're only looking at condominium units of different variety, different styles, but not condominium townhomes. Secondly, this accounts for all sale data occurring from January 1st of 2021, so the start of the year, until December 25th. So we don't really have the last 6 days of sold data included in this list, but obviously, 99% of the year is accounted for, and these prices get to the main point. They're not skewed all that much, and I'll obviously explain to you if they are skewed, as I always do. Lastly, and this is the most important preface in my opinion, as always, if you have any difficulty about knowing what these community names designate, there is a link to the TREB Maps in the description box. All you have to do is click on that link. There's interactive buttons on the top right corner. You can toggle and enable communities, go downtown, and you'll see exactly what these names kind of designate on a district basis, right? On a boundary by boundary, on a map basis. Obviously, if I say Bay Street Corridor, most people know what I'm talking about, but you might be surprised as to what certain streets are included in Bay Street Corridor. So for your point of reference, always go look at the maps as well. Anyways, let's start with the community, shall we? And since I mentioned Bay Street Corridor as an example, let us start with Bay Street Corridor, as was the case in 2021. Here we see there was upwards of 980 sales that occurred in Bay Street Corridor in 2021, with an average sold price of $855,000. Now, in this case, the median wasn't that far from the average, and in most cases, actually, in these neighborhoods and specific communities, because we're accounting for sheer hundreds and hundreds of transactions, the average and the median will be relatively close. What does that tell us? Well, when the average and the median are close, it shows us that the average price is a fair representation of the average in the area. What we saw on the ground with Bay Street Corridor was that it truly started to really heat up around August, end of August, into September. Up to that point, prices were pretty consistent. And although one of the more expensive areas in specific neighborhoods in downtown Toronto, it was definitely shy of its $855,000 average that we're looking at the end of the year, accounting for everything. But what started to happen, especially with regards to 1+1s, and I worked with sellers in this area, was due to the sudden expectations of things opening up for proximity to work purposes, especially within the financial and white collar district. That is Bay Street Corridor. 1+1s in particular became very highly sought after, and driven by a main thrust of 1+1s, the demand for 1+1s, prices really jumped. And once again, exiting the summer market, going into the fall market in terms of September and October, that's when the market for Bay Street Corridor condominiums, particularly for 1+1s, really got heated. And then into December, obviously the most recent month, we're in December at the time of recording of this video, we saw the average sold price actually jumped even further further up, coming in at $980,000 when we look at November and December together. Now, in particular, the last 2 months coming in at $980,000, that's a bit skewed though. As I said, I would call it the numbers as they are. That's a bit skewed because what we had was a $8 million penthouse unit that sold, which obviously carries up the average in that sense in terms of average. But really, if we're looking at retrospectively with regards to Bay Street Corridor, it really starts to blossom in the middle of the year. And here, condominium options are still relatively in the middle aged. Some of the more sought after condominium options in this area are actually quite older, 15 to 20 years old. Although they might have high carrying costs for end users, especially working professionals, they're very good. They're very well maintained, great property management. Sure, higher carrying costs, but a lot of end users in those buildings, so not a lot of turnover. Moving forward, let's take a look at Trinity Bellwoods. Now here, we're only going based upon 91 transactions, right? So off the bat, we went from 986 with Bay Street Corridor. Now we're looking at 91 transactions for the entirety of 2021. Shows you, obviously, Trinity Bellwoods is not a voluminous area in terms of condominium inventory. In terms of the average sold price in the year 2021, we are looking at an average sold price of $913,000. Once again, the median was close to the average in this sense. Now, a lot of people are surprised with regards to how high the average sold price is here at $913,000. One thing that I should obviously illuminate is that a lot of these transactions, a lot of the condominium inventory available in Trinity Bellwoods and a lot of the buildings are actually condominium lofts. Larger, more expensive, obviously lower maintenance per square foot because a lot of condo lofts don't really have a lot of common areas, but slower appreciating, nonetheless larger, more expensive options. As a result, since you have a lot of lofts that are part of the inventory options in Trinity Bellwoods, particularly with all the 91 sales that occurred in 2021, about 50% of the sales were either lofts or two-story condominiums, which are definitely far closer to lofts than they are your typical condominium apartment unit. You're gonna have a higher average sold price. And that's not the entirety of the point, because Trinity Bellwoods is a very desirable area. You have some of the best residential streets in downtown Toronto, within Trinity Bellwoods and around Trinity Bellwoods Park. And once again, these are residential, semi and town and detached properties that are very in demand and very desirable in downtown Toronto. And of course, that has a positive impact and has an effect on condominium values in that area. Now, shifting our focus, going from Trinity Bellwoods, which is the western side of downtown Toronto, to the eastern side of downtown Toronto, going towards Regent Park. Here in 2021, the average sold price of a condominium in Regent Park was $691,000. This was based upon 252 transactions. Now, Regent Park, if you're not familiar with the area, is a very well insulated area, meaning not particularly like City Place, because City Place was a planned community all by one builder, but much akin, closer to City Place and places like Liberty Village. You really do have just a couple of blocks that saw a sudden rush of development. And in that sense, it does have the feeling of an insulated planned community, even though it was not planned by one builder, as was the case with City Place. And with regards to Regent Park in 2021, on the ground, I helped people buy in Regent Park, and in terms of rentals, I've helped people rent out units in Regent Park. And from the numbers and my qualitative experience, in my frank opinion, one of the areas that has a lot of room to grow and presents itself as a good buy low opportunity is Regent Park. I really do believe that Regent Park has ways to grow and appreciate in 2022 as compared to more central and western portions of downtown Toronto. Now, Regent Park does present its own challenges with regards to, for instance, tenant portfolio, and the surrounding parts of Regent Park are a little bit less developed. Obviously, that's why part of the reason that Regent Park is cheaper per square foot in terms of average sold prices than Western Toronto, or rather Western downtown Toronto or Central downtown Toronto. But as builders are running out of lots in Central downtown, Western downtown, the ample land available between Church and Regent Park is surely going to become developed, and there's a lot of builders who have put a lot of proposals for certain parking lots and depreciated purpose-built rental buildings. Moving towards Moss Park, which obviously is still on the eastern side of downtown Toronto in C8 technically speaking, and resides south of Regent Park. Here in the year 2021, according to 500 transactions, the average sold price here was at $700,000. $733,000. Now, Moss Park, as is technically districted, according to the TREB Maps, is a little bit different than most people's expectations and their, knowledge, firsthand knowledge of what Moss Park actually is. If you look on the map, Moss Park has an L shape, which kind of accounts for areas that are west of Regent Park and east of Church Yonge corridor. And as a result, that's why you have a lot more inventory, a lot more sales included in Moss Park, as opposed to, once again, for instance, Regent Park that we just talked about. Furthermore, the Adelaide, Richmond, and King Street options are what kind of set apart Moss Park in average sold price as compared to its neighbor, Regent Park. King Street East and Adelaide are further south and they're more in demand. They have a better mixture of working professionals and lifestyle owners. Nonetheless, at $733,000, Moss Park is still in the bottom 5 in terms of least expensive, right? Moss Park still represents a more affordable community and neighborhood within downtown Toronto for condominiums, as it resides within the bottom 5 least expensive areas in downtown Toronto for condominiums, as you will see on this list. Now let's go towards C1 Waterfront, without a doubt the most voluminous area for downtown Toronto in terms of condominiums. Here we had, in the year 2021, obviously from January 1st to December 25th, we had 3,126 transactions, right, in the entire year. And I had to go through, most of these sales, hundreds by hundreds. And in terms of average sold price, we were looking at $788,000 for C1 Waterfront in 2021. Now, the reason Waterfront is so voluminous is you have a lot of condominium inventory, obviously, in this area, compact. You have City Place, you have the Fashion District, you have portions of the entertainment districts, portions of the financial district as well, Queens Quay, and as is the case with the name, Waterfront condominiums. And obviously, when you speak of downtown Toronto, this is what most people imagine, just C1 Waterfront. Now, interesting enough, when we had the buyer's market, when we had the down period within the Toronto condominium market, particularly with regards to downtown Toronto condominiums, this community, this district of C1 Waterfront was the one that was most impacted. That is to say, when we dealt with the buyer's market scenario that occurred November, December of last year, this was the community that was most impacted in terms of average sold prices dipping, days on market increasing, inventory increasing for both rental and purchase and sale, investors kind of losing money and kind of, selling due to fear of the worldwide event we were dealing with. And once again, I'm referring to November, December of 2020 going into 2021. What's interesting is, although this area was most impacted with regards to the downside of the market for condominiums, when the condominium market in downtown Toronto started to improve, starting out primarily due to people buying low, seeing it as an opportunity to buy low, which I worked with a lot of clients, investors who kind of decided to jump in to buy low at that time, which was a very wise move in retrospect now, obviously. The area that saw the first resemblance of a uptick in the downtown Toronto condo market and where a lot of units were in demand and the bullish run of the Toronto condo market, well, that area was C1 Waterfront. So on both sides of the spectrum, when there is a upswing in the market and a downswing on the market, C1 Waterfront is most often the first place that's impacted within downtown Toronto and really Toronto at large. Now, at the average sold price of $788, a lot of people might be wondering, well, why is this much lower than other places we've discussed on this list and other places we will discuss on this list? Now, at the average sold price of $788,000, a lot of people might be wondering, well, why is the average so low if this is Central Toronto, C1 Toronto, Waterfront Toronto, and why are other areas higher in average sold price and other areas we will discuss? It's due to the fact of the sheer amount of inventory available, right? You have so much inventory that's very difficult for the average sold price to compete with, for instance, Trinity Bellwoods, where it's mostly lofts and 2 stories, right? Here you have a lot of studios, you have a lot of older 1-bedroom, older 1+1s, or newer, more modern 1+1s and 1-bedrooms that are more in the middle range, right? Thus, as a result, due to the sheer amount of inventory available in the middle and lower price ranges, whether they're older or they're less desirable in terms of exposure, whatever the reason is, the average sold price naturally won't be the highest anytime we look at prices by specific neighborhoods, whether it's in this case for the year 2021, when we do it in 2025, if we did it in 2015. C1 Waterfront, due to the sheer variety of inventory available and the number of units in the middle and lower tier, will never represent the highest average sold prices or median sold prices. What you will find is probably the most expensive condominium sales and the cheapest condominium sales on either end of the spectrum will always probably occur in C1 Waterfront. More confidently so with regards to the most expensive condominium sales. C1 Waterfront may not always have the cheapest condominium sales. Other areas may compete for that, but definitely in terms of the most expensive, you will find that in C1, no doubt. But that does not necessarily reflect, especially with regards to 3,100 transactions, in the average sold price. Here, the average sold price was at $647,000 for the entirety of 2021 with regards to the Toronto condominium market, with about 263 sales. Now, this will actually be the cheapest area and is the cheapest area in 2021 with regards to the downtown Toronto condo market and downtown Toronto condo prices. And there's very good reason for that. It just doesn't have a lot of good options in terms of condominium inventory. Most famously so, which in the new year, I'll actually do a building review for these buildings, 36 Lisgar or 68 Abel. These buildings per square foot, you'll find some of the cheapest ones in 1+1s and 2 bedrooms per square foot in the entirety of downtown Toronto in these buildings. And once again, the reason for that is due to multiple factors: poor condominium development, poor conditions in terms of build conditions, poor property management. These buildings are very much so not desirable, and I would tell most people to stay away from these buildings. And these buildings happen to be some of the most transacted in this particular neighborhood. And this is even despite the fact that Little Portugal, much like Trinity Bellwoods, is a very residential focused area, at least as part of downtown Toronto, as residential as you can get in downtown Toronto. Nonetheless, though, if we break down all the sales that occurred in Little Portugal in 2021, and we break it down between the first half of 2021 to the second half of 2021, there was an uptick in prices. Nonetheless, with regards to the first half of 2021, the average sold price was $640 some odd thousand. If we just break it down to the second half, there was an improvement in prices, reaching $655,000. Moving forward, let's take a look at University. Here in the year 2021, you had the average sold price of $866,000, and this was based upon around 180 transactions in total that occurred from January 1st, 2021 to December 25th. In 2021, based upon 100 transactions in the area of University in downtown Toronto, according to the Toronto and downtown Toronto condo market, the average sold price was around $866,000. Now, University as an area, if you look at it on the map, it really truly is between Queen's Park and Bathurst, the east-west, and north-south is between Bloor and College. As a result, in this area, you have a lot of expensive buildings with regards to per square foot. For instance, you have the famous Shangri-La buildings that are, I believe, 180 University. Very much so in demand buildings. I personally find them to be a little bit overrated, but that's just my professional and my personal opinion. But once again, per square foot, that building goes around $1,300 per square foot. Furthermore, another example is the 488 University, the Residence on University, another building that goes for around $1,400 per square foot. And what I saw from University in 2021 is a very, of course, pricey area, but safe in terms of consistency. It's not really a investor-friendly area. You do have your share of investors, obviously, who rent out to qualified students because University is in the area of UFT, the University of Toronto, and you have a lot of students who rent in this area. As a result, you do have a fair portion of landlords. but it's not speculation friendly. It's not turnover friendly. With regards to short-term investors, definitely not a friendly area for that. It's very friendly for end user purposes. Once again, very safe and in demand when we compare it to other areas we've discussed, and we're going to discuss C8 Waterfront, C1 Waterfront, Niagara, Regent Park, Moss Park, all these other areas that we have discussed and we're going to discuss. Niagara, it's definitely not speculation investor friendly in that sense whatsoever. And if we actually put aside Trinity Bellwoods that we discussed earlier with regards to the fact that the average sold price there was $913,000, but as I explained, that's mostly due to the fact that half of the inventory option there is mostly lofts and two-story bi-level condominiums. If we put aside that particular case, University is actually the most expensive area and was the most expensive area in 2021 with regards to downtown Toronto condominium and the downtown Toronto condominium market. Next up, let's take a look at C8 Waterfront, which once again, feel free to refer to the maps because these names are not as intuitive as University, Chinatown, Cabbagetown, Moss Park. With regards to C8 Waterfront in 2021, the average sold price was $813,000 based upon 652 transactions, which to my disbelief was actually quite a bit lower in terms of transactions than I would have assumed would be the case, because C8 Waterfront is a fairly voluminous area in terms of condominium inventory. Of course, C8 Waterfront accounts for the distillery district, which is a very in-demand area, and much of the distillery condominiums really do drive the main thrust of prices here. And along with the distillery district, adjacent to that, you do have the Esplanades, the Esplanade buildings, most famously the AP Esplanade, that also make up a fair portion of transactions in this area, C8 Waterfront. But as is, it's mostly a area with regards to the districting and map. It's not really an intuitive area, once again, as we discussed with Bay Street Corridor or University. The only reason here the average sold price is higher than, for instance, C1 Waterfront is to what we mentioned with regards to C1 Waterfront. It's just the vastness of the inventory and the sales, right? It's very difficult for C1 Waterfront at any point in time for those prices to be up there with other areas. Now, particularly with C8 Waterfront, the buildings and condominium options available on the Esplanade were adversely impacted this year due to the homeless shelter situation that did pop up, and it actually did, once again, adversely impact condominium values on the Esplanade. And in this area, what the condominiums that I saw most in demand and the greatest amount of activity from were more distillery district condominiums with regards to, for instance, 70 Distillery Lane or the 33 Mill building. That's once again where the main thrust of this area at the current moment in time. Of course, you do have your front options and Lower Jarvis as well. Okay, moving on to Church Yonge Corridor, which is yet another major area, the neighboring community to Bay Street Corridor. With regards to the average sold price as was in 2021, the average sold price was at $743,000 based upon a high amount of transactions, 1,300 transactions, more than Bay Street Corridor. So in terms of how these two areas are connected, obviously they're right next to each other on the map, as you can see, and they're vertical in nature. A lot of times trends with regards to prices, demand for certain property types that occur in Bay Street Corridor actually shift over into Church Yonge Corridor, as was the case in 2021. When we started jumping prices and uptick in demand, particularly for the 1+1 variety in Bay Street Corridor in 2021, Church Yonge Corridor was soon to follow in the following weeks to month. Put differently, there's often a shift of demand that occurs from Bay Street Corridor, which is sometimes the primary option, to Church Yonge Corridor, which is the secondary option. Nonetheless, Church Yonge Corridor is home to a lot of affordable options that are actually very good in terms of quality, not lower per square foot buildings, as I discussed in Little Portugal, or certain places in Cabbagetown, Moss Park, and Niagara. We will discuss that there's something wrong with them, right? There's a reason they're cheaper per square foot in terms of area, neighborhood, building, whatever the case is. Here, you actually have a lot of low per square foot price buildings that are very much so qualified and dignified. It's just they're older, right? You have a lot of older options, lower per square foot, both in terms of price and maintenance, by the way. You have a lot of good low maintenance older buildings here. So a lot of decent to great affordable options are in Church-Yonge corridor when we're looking at central downtown. Another key point here is, along with Bay Street corridor and I would say C1 Waterfront, this is where parking is very much so the most scarce. Obviously, it's downtown Toronto. At the end of the day, parking is land is scarce all over downtown Toronto. But Church-Yonge corridor, Bay Street corridor, and University, along with C1 Waterfront, rank up there, at least from my observations, as to some of the areas where parking is the most scarce. One last point on Church-Yonge corridor. In the year 2021, we saw, or at least I observed, a uptick in demand for the older buildings. You did have a lot of newer condominium buildings that were completed this year and are set to actually complete that were pretty pricey per square foot. As a result, they actually had a positive impact on demand for older buildings in the same area. And lastly, we're going to finish up with Niagara region of downtown Toronto, the Niagara community, where according to 1,100 transactions, so once again, a high amount of transactions, we saw an average sold price of $739,000. Now, one thing about the Niagara region that I saw at a distance, because of all the business I did in downtown Toronto, Niagara was one of the only places in downtown that I didn't do any buying and selling, so I observed this at a distance. But when we had the peak market conditions earlier in 2021, following the bottom that was December, November of 2020 into January, where things really picked up in February, March, and April, 2 weeks into April, condominiums here were sold at ridiculously high prices. And out of every other area that I observed this year, this is where prices were slower to recover through the summer market. Now, by no means am I remotely implying that condominiums depreciated here. By no means. They actually went up in prices after the summer market. But it took a longer period of time for them to reach the same levels they were sold at around, once again, April and March. At the end of the day, Niagara is very much so a mixed bag for me. You do have your Liberty Village condos, which, as I said earlier in this video, I'm not a fan of. Although there are few good options in Liberty Village, and you don't want to completely wipe out Liberty Village as an entire community, but if we're going to look at it at a general level, not a big fan of Liberty Village. The further north you go in Niagara region, actually I think that's where some of the better options reside. Anyways, this was a long video. I didn't cover all I wanted to by any means. I have a lot more notes and thoughts left. Feel free to get in touch with me with any further questions. Thank you very much for watching. You can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Instagram, my Gmail, and my office. Feel free to get in touch with any questions. Lastly, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe, stay tuned, and I'll see you in the new year. Thank you very much.